29 of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside Andrew Ivins. We got a great show for you today. We are back from an international trip. That is right. The Oyster Boys are now international verified, Drew. We will discuss that, our scouting trip to Europe. We'll also discuss a crazy week of recruiting. Cormani McClain, Desmond Ricks on tap. We'll also talk about some of the things that have transpired over the last week. We'll get to the team of the week in week 8. That is the Oregon Ducks. Dan Lanning got the Ducks rolling. We'll also get into the 2-minute drill. Cedric Baxter, top 247 running back, maybe looking around a little bit. And then we'll discuss Texas A&M. But Drew, good to see you, my friend. It's been a while. No show this past Monday this week. And I know me and you were kind of eager to get back to it. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm grinding the tape. You're the one that's logging the miles, probably flying first class, drinking some nice European beer. You tell me, how are you doing?
Yeah, what a fabulous life it is. I was actually on the last 2 seats, me and my fiance, on the way back from Europe in a 737. But that's neither here nor there. Watched The Godfather 1 and 2, great flicks. But let's get into a little bit. PPI, if you don't know anything about PPI, CEO Brandon Collier, and that is Premier Prospects International. They put on an event in Essen, Germany this past weekend, and I was fortunate enough to go out there and get to see over 150 prospects this weekend from over 21 countries, and what an event it was. And I'll start really from the top. The alpha dog, Justin Okenroko from Germany, 2024 linebacker, a guy who is also of Nigerian descent, 6'3", 200 pounds plus. He had an excellent day on Friday and Saturday. So a 2-day weekend event. Basically, the prospects went through a lot of combine testing on Friday, agility drills as well, and then on Saturday, a controlled padded scrimmage, which was a first for a lot of these guys, but an extraordinary event. We'll talk a little bit about Okenroko a little bit. For the Michigan fans out there, 3-star edge rusher Amir Kumba was also in attendance. He looked very good. And then 3-star defensive lineman Max Stiege from Germany, the Boise State commit, in attendance. So, Drew, a heck of an event, man. A lot going on, and what an opportunity to get out to Europe, see some of these guys. But, trust me, I think me and you are probably going to be jostling for the responsibilities to go to Europe if we do have the opportunity to do so in the future.
Well, Coop, I got to ask you this, right? So you went out there and you went to really the ground zero for this international movement. We've seen it with the NFL draft. We've seen it kind of in the college ranks. More and more guys from different European countries are now being signed by these schools. And it is a movement. You said Brandon Collier and PPI. I looked it up. From 2010 to 2016, there was only 2 prospects that are actually from a European country, we're going to school there, that signed FBS scholarships. We're starting to see more and more of that. I think there was 3 alone last cycle. We got a few kids, you just mentioned them, committed here in the 2023 cycle. So you've been over there, right? You've scouted the States. Now that you've seen it, is it worth it for these schools to, invest some time into these scouting trips, or at least, pour through the film and the data?
I think so, and I think you said it. What you said in the latter part of your statement there, I think in terms of investing proactively in making sure that you have exposure to international prospects is important, because there are some people out there and some prospects out there that are good enough players to play in the United States. And whether that's at the FBS level, the FCS level, or even the Ivy Leagues, there were a number of prospects in attendance. We kind of mentioned Amir Kumba, already committed to Michigan, Max Stiege, the Boise State commit. They also had 2023 running back Oliver Lundberg from Sweden, committed to Western Kentucky. So there was a lot to like about them, and a lot of upcoming prospects in the 2024 as well. I think from an athletic standpoint, what the players in Europe, to me, proved this past weekend is athletically, they are there in terms of being able to play in the United States. It's the level of development that still needs to occur from their time in Europe to the time they get acclimated in the United States. But also met with Chris Durham, who is overseeing NFL Academy. He's a former UGA standout, Georgia Bulldog, also played in the league as well for a few years, and now is spending time in Paris, France, where the NFL Academy is. And essentially they want to model, for lack of a better term, something similar to what IMG Academy is doing in the States. Make sure that international prospects have all the best resources possible so they have the opportunity to play in the States and hopefully one day play on Sundays. So I think when you think about the big picture right now and where football, American football in Europe is currently and where it's going to be in 10 years, you look at the NFL and what they're trying to do in Europe. If the NFL actually decides that they are going to put 4 more organizations in Europe, I think American football really has a chance to blossom there. And when you talk to people there and when you talk to prospects there, they're very excited about that opportunity. And I think the game is only going to continue to grow. And we've seen that. And we've seen teams like Michigan have success in international waters. Julius Welshoff was a guy in 2018, part of the class when I was there as a recruiting coordinator that came over from Germany. So we see it there again. Jim Harbaugh trying to double dip and hopefully strike twice with Emerick Kumba, another long and developmental edge rusher. So there are players there. I think you just have to dig. But to me, Drew, I think the investment is worth it.
Yeah, and I got 2 more questions for you. First thing, it seems like a lot of these guys are more of the bigger framed, either a point of attack players like you're seeing Kumba right here working on the edge, or maybe a tight end, offensive lineman. So would you agree you're looking for more big bodies, I think mid skills? And then in the second part, you mentioned it. I've heard this from Power 5 recruiting directors. You know, when they get these international kids into their program, what they have noticed, these kids are hungry, right? You know, when they show up in the United States at an SEC program or a Big Ten program, they're there to learn and they become a sponge and soak everything in. They don't have any preconceived notion about how something's supposed to be. You tell them to do it, they're going to get that task done. So just wondering, you interacting with those guys, have you got that same kind of takeaway in terms of their attitude and what's between the ears?
I'm glad you asked that question because they're incredibly eager. And that was one of the biggest takeaways for me in Europe, having the chance to interact with a lot of these prospects and their coaches. They just want to learn. They're eager to have the opportunity to be around the game. They're eager to have the opportunity to be seen. Even with my presence there representing 24/7 Sports was a really big exposure point for them. And I think a chance that a lot of these guys really relish. So in terms of those guys supporting each other, they really enjoyed being around the game. Even after the event ended, there was probably another hour where over 100 prospects stayed around the field and really interacted with each other. I think these guys have a spirit about them when it comes to the game of American football. And it's a really, really beautiful thing to see. And I think there's a lot of momentum being built there as well. So we talked about a lot of the guys like Kumba, Steege, and Lundberg as well. There's one more guy that I want to throw out there that really impressed on Friday and Saturday. And Drew, I know you like this because you're a big Freaks List guy, but Duncan Brune, I would be remiss if I did not bring this guy up. Guy that we have unranked right now, but a running back, 5'11", 185 pounds, originally from Frankfurt, Germany. Mom was a 5-time Olympic swimmer for the German national team. He is already training for the German bobsledding team. So a guy right now, genetically, what he has in his body, a sub 1100 meter guy, 10.81 in the 100 meter, a lot to like there. So Drew, I think there's a ton of talent, and I think we'll be there. I think along with Europe, I don't think they're going anywhere. I think we'll be there as well.
Well, my goal now is to get a European on the 2024 edition of that Freaks List for the class of 2024. So I was going to give you that as a homework assignment. Hey, find me a guy. Sounds like you might already have one in. You've already got a suggestion. Look at that.
Yeah, I don't think we'll have a problem there. So once again, thank you to our friends in Europe for having us out there, Brandon Collier and his staff included. But a great time, and hopefully we'll be out there in the future. But Drew, let's get back to the States here, in a lot cooking right now, especially with the defensive backs in the class of 2023. But first, I want to start in the state of Florida with the Florida Gators. Right now, the number 8 class in the country. Billy Napier and the Gators off to a 4-3 start. They got a big game this weekend, but a big flip for them this past week. And Roderick Kearney, top 247 offensive lineman from the Sunshine State, formerly committed to Alex Atkins and Mike Norvell in the Seminoles. Drew, this is a big get for Florida.
It is. And I tweeted this out on Monday night after Roderick announced that he was flipping from Florida State to Florida. This recruitment's going to live in recruiting lore. I can't ever recall a timeline like this. Let's go back to June. Roderick Kearney takes an official visit to UF. On the way home, he calls Alex Atkins in Florida State and gives a pledge to the Seminoles, like less than 4 hours after that UF official visit. Well, fast forward a few months, Kearney takes his official to Florida State, and then a week later he flips over to Florida. I think this is a testament of Billy Napier and that staff and their ability to keep chipping away. And I think honestly, Roderick Kearney, out of all the offensive linemen in the class of 2023, this guy fits what the Gators want to do up front more than anyone else. He's a power scheme blocker. He's nasty. He plays through the whistle. He's a big body that can get to the second level. So I love this take for Florida. I think on the national scale, it won't be discussed enough. But if you're familiar with what Florida wants to do in the trenches, right now they're third in the SEC when it comes to rushing the football. They want these big, nasty point of attack players. Roderick Kearney is that. He fits the motto, 5 equals 1, so that 5 offensive linemen equals 1 unit. And I think Roderick Kearney is a monster get for the Gators, who probably aren't done right now on the recruiting trail.
Roderick Kearney, the number 7 interior lineman in the country, according to 24/7 Sports, will join Bryce Lovett and Najee Harris. The Gators doing a really good job on the offensive line. But Drew, let's turn our attention to the number 1 defensive prospect in the country. That is Cormani McClain, and a lot of eyes focused on this one as he has a decision set for tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern. That will be on CBS Sports HQ, Drew. And right now the crystal ball is reading all Florida Gators, but the Tide, the Canes, also involved. What's the latest you're hearing on Cormani McClain?
Yeah, what are we, 28 hours or so away from his announcement? I'm riding with the orange and blue here. I mean, things can get wacky in the 11th hour, especially of the NIL era when it comes to recruiting. But I think Cormani, I think he wants to be at Florida. If you look at his visit schedule, really the only school he's checked out since things opened back up in September is Florida. He was in the swamp for that season opening win against Utah. I think he wants to, I've always said this, I think he wants to be at Florida. I think he's looking for a reason for the Gators to give him a reason to go there. And I think Corey Raymond, Billy Napier, they're doing just that. I mentioned how good Florida is at running the football. Well, they're really bad at defending the pass right now. They're 90th nationally, I think 109 in total defense. They need some help in the secondary. Already have 6 defensive backs committed, including 2 guys we really like, Jakeem Jackson and Dijon Mustard Johnson. Well, if they could add Cormani McClain to that group, man, Billy Napier, Corey Raymond, they're doing an excellent job. So I like Florida. We'll see what happens. Never going to count out Nick Saban. Never going to count out Mario Cristobal, especially with Mario Cristobal kind of backed into a corner right now. You know he's going to go down swinging. So we'll see what happens. But all indications, all signs pointing to Florida with a day to go until his announcement.
Corey Raymond staying hot on the recruiting trail. Drew, you mentioned Jakeem Jackson, a guy that both me and you really like. Can you imagine pairing him with a guy like Cormani McClain? And if you're the Gators, right now it's probably time to get greedy a little bit. We were talking about, is it going to be Florida? Is it going to be Miami? Is it going to be Florida State? Which team is really going to take advantage of recruiting this cycle? Right now, it looks like the Gators are doing the best job of that, Drew. But there's another guy sitting out there that has a pretty good chance of being labeled as a CB1 one day. That is Desmond Ricks, the number 33 player in the top 247 in the class of 2023, the number 3 cornerback. And that's pretty impressive given the fact that he just reclassified from the class of 2024. Desmond Ricks, already 18 years old. I don't think a lot of people know that, but I think he's going to be ready to play at the next level. Drew, we just talked about it. Him reclassifying, now going to be available for the 2023 cycle. It sounds like there's a couple a couple SEC teams, LSU, Alabama being some of them vying for his services. What's the latest on Desmond Ricks?
Right, and Florida's in there as well. I mean, Desmond Ricks has visited a number of different schools. He's a kid that's originally from the 757 up there in Virginia, but he moved to IMG. It was supposed to be for 3 seasons. It's only going to be 2 seasons. And everyone I talk to around that recruitment says SEC battle, SEC battle. I think Florida's a team you got to watch out for, and I think LSU and Brian Kelly, those guys need help in the secondary. And I would keep an eye on the Tigers after me and Steve Wiltfong traded notes a few days ago. Coop, I want to circle back on the scouting take with Desmond Ricks. You mentioned this in pre-production. You've mentioned it on recruiting calls. I think you don't think there's that big of a difference between Desmond Ricks and Cormani McClain. And what's interesting, I think, I've been comparing Cormani McClain to Tyreek Woolen, who's the rookie for the Seattle Seahawks, a big, long corner. I think there's a little Sauce Gardner in his game as well. And when you look at Cormani and you put him side by side with Desmond Ricks, I mean, really, those two guys are very similar when it comes to testing numbers, and they're very similar when it comes to frames. So how big of a gap do you think there is between those two?
I mean, we're talking about the number 4 player in the country, the number 1 defensive back in the country as well, number 1 defensive player in the country in Cormani McClain in the 2023 cycle. I think the gap is in more of experience than it is physical talent. Just having the opportunity to see those guys work out together really side by side in Bradenton at the Future 50 over the summer, that's kind of really where it clicked for me that there's not this big gap between those guys. And I think Desmond Ricks, I mean, you think about the company that he's in, the number 3 cornerback in the country already after reclassifying. I mean, that's Cormani McClain, A.J. Harris, and then Desmond Ricks. So all 3 of those guys supremely athletically gifted. I think that's what makes Desmond Ricks who he is. I think there's still some room to grow, develop as a football player. I think that's where he's going to have to take the next step. But Desmond Ricks, physically, to me, Drew, is going to be able to play at the next level almost immediately because of the physical gifts that he has.
Yeah, and he reminds me of another guy from that Virginia Beach area, Tony Grimes. I just updated the player scouting report for Desmond Ricks, and he, like Cormani, he's over 6 foot. He's got a 126-inch broad jump. He's a 4.5 kid on the lasers. So he reminds me of Tony Grimes, who, again, from Virginia, reclassified, enrolled early at North Carolina, played as a young freshman, and is now turned into one of the top cover corners in the ACC. So someone's going to get a good one in Desmond Ricks. Someone's going to get a good one in Cormani McClain. And heck, maybe Florida gets both of them. Heck, I mean, they might have their whole secondary here locked up by the time December comes around.
Gators rolling. And Drew, I just want to confirm on this. It doesn't sound like Desmond Ricks is going to make a decision anytime soon, correct?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that's going to go take his official visits. You know, why not take your official visits? Everyone wants him on campus. So, yes, Cormani's going to decide Thursday. I would think Desmond Ricks is going to go into December, and he's going to potentially enroll early. I mean, that's what most of those kids do out of IMG Academy.
Gators rolling right now. You had potential 5-star Cormani McClain in the mix. We'll keep an eye on Desmond Ricks. But if you're a Florida fan, it's almost as much about what Billy Napier did or is doing on the recruiting trail this cycle than what they're doing on the field. And right now, you got to be happy if you're a Gators fan in the way that it's trending. So we'll keep an eye on Florida. But Drew, also a very busy week in recruiting for a late week in October, I would say. And let's go to the Big Ten and start with Mickey Joseph in Nebraska right now. Malachi Coleman, one of the best athletes in the country, number 4 athlete in the country, number 68 player in the top 247. He's got a visit, has had a visit to Nebraska recently, and it sounds like Nebraska trending in the right direction for the in-state prospect. And Drew, I know this is a guy that me and you had kind of circled and kind of wondering what was going on with his recruitment. It sounds like the in-state team in the Nebraska Cornhuskers are really doing a good job and might be close to closing this one.
Well, they did close him out on Saturday. I'll give you a Petagna flag right here. I know you were overseas flying first class and all that stuff. Malachi pulled the trigger, announced a commitment to Nebraska on Saturday. And what's hilarious about this whole thing is Mickey Joseph, the interim head coach, was asked by a local media member on Tuesday about Malachi Coleman, goes ahead and proceeds to talk about Malachi Coleman and use his name, which is a clear-cut NCAA violation. I'm sure he's just going to get a slap on the wrist and they'll chalk it up as a mistake he didn't know. But the big thing Mickey Joseph said about Malachi is, hey, 6 months ago, Malachi told us he wasn't coming to Nebraska. And then for him to turn around and commit to the Cornhuskers, I think is certainly notable. You know, the big knock on Malachi when you exchange messages with different college contacts and different recruiting departments is, what is he? You know, is he an edge rusher? Is he a tight end? Is he a wide receiver? I don't really think it matters. This is a guy that was number 9 on my freaks list. 3-time U.S. track and field youth All-American. He can fly. He can catch the football. And I think this is a statement for Mickey Joseph, who seems to be campaigning to keep that job in Lincoln. Since taking over for Scott Frost, he has led the Cornhuskers to a 2-2 record. So we'll see what happens. I think Malachi Coleman is a huge get. It would have been a huge get for Scott Frost. And I think whoever is hired, or if Mickey Joseph drops the interim tag, priority number one will be to keep Malachi Coleman committed, get him across the finish line, get him signed there in December.
Me and Mickey Joseph, two Louisiana boys making mistakes here this week. And, we missed an episode on Monday, Drew. I'm knocking the rust off, man, a little jet lag. But that is a big gift for Mickey Joseph in Nebraska. And I know me and you were very high on Malachi Coleman, the type of athlete that he is, a sub 10.5 in the 100-meter. And like you said, Drew, I don't think it really matters what side of the ball that he's going to play. It's just important that he's going to be playing his ball in Lincoln. And right now, Mickey Joseph 2-2 as the interim head coach at Nebraska. His chances of being the head coach and having that tag removed, I don't know, Drew. To me, it seems like wishful thinking. We'll see how the Cornhuskers finish out here. But, Drew, let's go to the Big 12 now. And some news there as well as top 247 athlete Jelani McDonald decommits from Mike Gundy in Oklahoma State. This a couple weeks after receiving an offer from Texas and the Longhorns and Steve Sarkisian. It looks like they're out on the trail of Jelani McDonald. But, Drew, this is a big one. This is a guy that we liked a lot. It's been a recent riser for us in the top 247. What are your takeaways on this one?
Well, I'm surprised Texas fans aren't flooding my inbox because I called Texas a loser on Sunday in my weekly recruiting winners and losers column. And that's because they fell on the road to Oklahoma State. I said the Cowboys now have all the ammunition to go right to Jelani McDonald and say, hey, man, stick with us. But that obviously isn't the case. Jelani McDonald has opened his recruitment back up. And while this seems like a slam dunk, maybe alley-oop for UT, exchanged some messages. Mike Roach, our colleague at 24/7 Sports, he doesn't think it's a done deal. He thinks Oklahoma State is still in play for Jelani McDonald. He thinks Jelani wants to take some visits. He also tossed out Ole Miss. I've heard Ole Miss is very high on Jelani McDonald as well. So still some twists and turns left in this recruitment. As a prospect, though, Coop, you mentioned how much we love him. This was a guy that was number 23 on my freaks list. Texas 4A long jump champion, averaged 0.4 points a game in the playoffs. He's a hooper. He has a great dunk reel. And in a game this season, he threw 2 touchdown passes, ran a touchdown, had a pick 6, and returned a kickoff for a touchdown. So he scored, 4 or 5 different ways. He is a true athlete. He's a freak. Interested to see where he ends up because he is the real deal.
Very similar profile to Malachi Coleman. I don't think anybody knows you're going to play offense or defense. Like I said, it really doesn't matter. So we'll keep an eye on Jelani McDonald. But, Drew, staying busy in the Sunshine State, a couple guys that you've brought up on this show before, but that is 3-star receiver Daidren Zipperer. He recently decommits from Pitt. Sounds like Utah is starting to make a move there.
I did toss in a crystal ball pick for Utah a few days ago, hearing he can make an announcement sooner rather than later. This is kind of your typical Florida wide receiver, guy that's really good at creating separation, catching the football, might not have the speed markers you want out there. But I think the interesting with Mr. Zipperer, if he were to pick Utah, what does that mean next season when it comes to his brother? And anyone familiar with Lakeland High School in Polk County, Keon Zipperer is Daidren's older brother. He is a tight end at Florida, former top 247 recruit. He plays a lot for UF, 13 catches this season, but there's been some murmurs out there, some rumors that, hey, he could potentially look to spend his final season of eligibility elsewhere. Well, would he follow his brother to Utah, where they love to use tight ends? Utes top 2 tight ends have caught almost 40 passes this season. So that'd be an interesting, kind of a side addition to that recruitment. But Daidren Zipperer back on the market. UCF, USF would love to get involved there, but I like Utah for him.
Not a bad place to play tight end up there in Salt Lake City. Drew as well. West Virginia picking up a quarterback. That is Sean Boyle, the recent quarterback commit of Charlotte. And if you know anything about Charlotte right now, you know they're in the midst of a coaching change after they fired Will Healy, the once young, promising head coach. But, Drew, you kind of like this one. This one kind of piqued your interest a little bit.
It did, Coop, because I watched probably 45 class of 2023 arms last week, all their midseason stuff. And Sean Boyle was a guy that I circled as a group of 5 commit that should probably get some Power 5 looks. He's 6'1.5", 200 pounds, 4.8 on the lasers, 4.4 shuttle. But I think when you turn on the tape, this is a guy that's extremely comfortable in the face of pressure. He can run some RPOs, and he just has some moxie to him, and I really, really like that. So I like this pickup for West Virginia and Neil Brown. I mean, the Mountaineers are in a difficult situation of their own, and not a lot of people don't know what the long-term outlook is for that program. So I like this pickup. Again, not one that a lot of people are going to be discussing, but I think Boyle is a guy that can win games in the Big 12. And if I'm West Virginia, that's what I want at the quarterback position, especially in a down year where your coach is on the hot seat.
Really like this get for Neil Brown. Got to see Boyle at the Elite 11 regionals in Nashville. Certainly a guy that impressed. But that does it for silly season. And, keep your eyes and ears open for silly season, as Drew likes to call it. Flips on the way as early signing day is approaching, December 21st, right around the corner. Be here before you know it. We'll have you covered here at 24/7 Sports. Make sure you subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you give us a like, leave a comment as well as we approach episode 30 on Preps to Pros, Drew, if you can believe it or not. But let's get to segment 3. That is our team of the week, and that is Dan Lanning, also known as the Danimal. And he's known as the Danimal for a lot of different reasons, not only because of the on-field success that Oregon is having this season, the only loss coming to number 1 Georgia, but also the recruiting success. The Ducks ranked number 10 in the country per the 24/7 Sports composite team rankings. They are also number 1 in the Pac-12 in the recruiting rankings. And Drew, you got to like what the Oregon Ducks are doing on the trail. What are your initial takeaways when you look at this class?
I love what they are doing in terms of rebuilding that front 7. Right now, they got 4 defensive linemen committed. They got 3 edge rushers and a linebacker. And Cooper, we always talk about it with the Pac-12. There's not a lot of big bodies out there on the West Coast. You kind of have to go hunting for these individuals. And Dan Lanning and his staff are doing just that. You have to feel good if you're an Oregon fan about the future of that pass rush. And I know you're going to get into the quarterback here, Dante Moore, but I think if you're building out a championship roster, you need 2 things, a quarterback and then guys that can get after the quarterback. And Dan Lanning is doing that there at Oregon. I also think it's impressive them pushing a little bit into SEC country. Currently have a commitment right there in Mississippi. I think they're also in on some other guys. So Dan Lanning, we didn't know what he would do. Guy that didn't have much ties to the West Coast or that far out west. He's off to a good start on the field, and I think what he's doing when it comes to talent acquisition and recruiting is just as impressive.
I'm going to piggyback off what you said about the geography of what Dan Lanning is doing. 13 different states represented in this 22-player class right now, but 9 of the 13 states come from the West Coast, and I think that's really important. I think for Dan Lanning, a guy with a lot of his roots in the southeastern part of the United States, it would have been easy with Oregon's national brand to start drifting east of the Mississippi. So I think he's doing a really good job staying home and getting most of Oregon's talent from that West Coast footprint, and having to go down to Mississippi to get a guy like Dante Daddle certainly makes a lot of sense. So I think Oregon on the right track there. Marshall Malkow leading the charge off the field, a guy that has a lot of experience. If you don't know about him, one of Dan Lanning's biggest acquisitions, leading that personnel department over there, worked for Chris Peterson at the University of Washington. So certainly a guy that knows that footprint really well. So I really like what they're doing there. But Drew, the biggest takeaway for me is if you're going to win in today's college football and you're going to win at the highest level, you got to have the guy at the quarterback position. And there is no question that Oregon and Dan Lanning has that in Dante Moore, the number 2 player in the top 247, a guy that I absolutely love, that I think is going to be ready from day one to start and compete in Eugene. I think this guy, not only from a physical skill set standpoint, but just from an intangible standpoint as well, he is ready-made, one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the country. You talk about a guy that takes care of the football at a really high level and doesn't turn the ball over. Oregon is littered with talent on the perimeter. They're building that backfield as well. I think they're only getting stronger on the offensive line. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Josh Connerly, the number one offensive tackle in the country last year. They win that recruitment late in the process. So Dan Lanning doing a really good job. This roster has a very solid foundation, but if you don't have that guy at the quarterback position, then it's all for naught. We talked about the importance of that with Notre Dame, how they're building a really good roster foundation, but the quarterback position remains a question. I think Kenny Dillingham, Dan Lanning, they all deserve a lot of credit to be able to go out there and get one of the best arms in the country in Dante Moore. But Drew, let's start off with our headliners in the class, and since we're already talking about them already, a couple pro comps for us, but Dante Moore, is there a guy that he reminds you of?
Donovan McNabb. And I know someone on our recruiting team threw this one out to me a few months ago, and I was like, And then I had a chance when I had the flu 2 weeks ago to watch a Dante Moore game in length with all the commercials, all the timeouts. And I was like, man, this guy does remind me of Donovan McNabb. He's got one of probably the strongest arms in the class. He throws an excellent deep ball, and I think he just elevates the play of others around him. When I watched that game, Castech versus King, Dante Moore, I think every snap was low, and he shrugged it off and kept playing. I think he moves in the pocket very similar to McNabb, who was a star at Syracuse, obviously had a productive career there in the NFL and was a first-round pick. But I saw a lot of similarities. I think if you're an Oregon fan, what gets you excited is me and you, Cooper, and everyone else, Brandon Huffman, Greg Biggins, we keep telling you how good Dante Moore is. And if you just watch Bo Nix, who was cast away from Auburn, just absolutely light up UCLA, I'd be licking my chops about what Kenny Dillingham, what Dan Lanning, what they're going to do with Dante Moore, who we think could play from day one. So guy to be super excited about. I think he just makes everyone around him better. I think he makes everyone in that huddle feel more confident. And I'm very confident that he's going to win some games there in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I love the way he leads. The comp for me was Dak Prescott, more of the Dak Prescott that we've seen as of recently in Dallas, not the Dak Prescott that we saw under Dan Mullen in Starkville at Mississippi State. I think this is more of a guy that comps to a very comfortable passer. And like I said, very cerebral, can play at all three levels, very accurate, knows how to change pace, change velocities, which I think is a very important skill set for a quarterback, plays with touch. And I think a guy that's very experienced. When you watch Dante Moore, to me, how he differentiates himself from the rest of the quarterback class, which we have called very deep, talented, and sometimes even very special. I think Dante Moore is the one guy right now. If you had to take a guy today to suit up and win a football game on Friday night, it would be Dante Moore. And we've talked about the reps that he's had, the experience, his ability to take care of the football. And Drew, I think you said it, his ability to elevate the talent around him. And sometimes that's as simple as it is. When you have all the surrounding talents, you just need a guy in the middle to make it go. I think that's exactly what Dante Moore is. But Drew, another guy that Dante Moore is going to be throwing the ball to for years to come, that is Jurion Dickey, and a guy that has really exploded in the rankings for us over the offseason, now a household name in the top 247, the number 2 receiver in the top 247, but a guy that we love out of the state of California, Dan Lanning and company, very smart Junior Adams receivers coach over there in Eugene, to lock up Jurion Dickey early in this process, as a lot of suitors have come knocking, but it seems that he is solid with the Ducks. And Drew, from the beginning, I've been pretty steadfast on this one. He has reminded me of A.J. Brown, big physical receiver that kind of can get what he wants when he wants. Kind of basketball skill set, 50-50 ball catcher, but very physical at the point of attack as a pass catcher, and then also with the ball in his hands. He can beat you a lot of different ways. So I love the addition of a Jurion Dickey, and if you're an Oregon fan, you got to be salivating at the fact that Dante Moore and Jurion Dickey are going to be playing football together for the years to come.
Coop, I love that comp so much. I didn't even really want to write one down. I wrote Treylon Burks here, but I just was going to go and defer to you, A.J. Brown, because I think it just fits. If you've seen A.J. Brown play on Sundays, picture that. That is Jurion Dickey. I loved him out at the OT7 event. Everyone's like, oh, it's 7-on-7. Why does this stuff matter? Well, the cream of the crop rises to the top, right? The best of the best make plays, and Jurion Dickey was on a loaded 7-on-7 team, the Miami Immortals, and I don't think anyone at that tournament ran a better post corner route. That guy just consistently got open. I agree 100%. We're talking about Oregon, the future of that program. Kenny Dillingham, Dan Lanning, what are they going to do? Well, they got QB1 and Dante Moore, and then they got wide receiver 1 in Jurion Dickey. And I think he's a guy that you can do a variety of different things. You could put him at H-back if you wanted to. I mean, he's over 200 pounds, but he still runs a 4.5 on the lasers. I just think he's a dude. He's excellent after the catch. Super excited to see him. And again, that A.J. Brown comp, ooh, chef's kiss, Cooper. That's a good one.
A lot of firepower in this class offensively, so we're going to stay on the offensive side of the ball. But the next guy, Drew, another riser for us, Kenyon Sadiq out of the state of Idaho, a guy that you could label as a receiver or kind of more as an H-back flex tight end, but a guy that is certainly dynamic and I think is going to enter the fold almost immediately. He's going to be a hard guy to keep off the field, hovering around 6'3", 225 pounds. This is a guy that ran a sub-11.1 in the 100-meter, and a guy that is very dynamic as a pass catcher, but I love his versatility as a inline blocker as well, Drew. I think you can line him up in the backfield. I love this guy. My comp for him was Jonnu Smith, who's now with the New England Patriots, played his ball at Florida International, third-round pick back in 2017. Evan Ingram also was a name that kind of popped up with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Ole Miss before that. But, Drew, I love Kenyon Sadiq. Gives this Kenny Dillingham passing offense just another tool in the toolkit that they're going to be very hard to defend.
Oh, you said wide receiver, tight end. How about just like a chess piece, a guy that you can move around and figure out different ways to get the football? No, Jonnu Smith, glad you gave out our group of 5 brothers, FIU, a little shout out there. I actually saw him earlier this year at a camp working there. And, you know, when you see him at first glance, he's not the biggest guy, but it's those individuals that are so good at moving around and catching the football and being under control. Those are the scary mismatches, the guys that you can move around. And I think Sadiq is just that. Coop, I think that comp works. I think another one, Isaiah Likely. I said this before when we were talking about Sadiq moving up in the rankings. What about like Taysom Hill, who's also calls the state of Idaho home? I mean, these are guys you just move around, figure out ways to get them the football, and they make plays. So another great addition. You know, we're going to keep talking about it. I said I like how Oregon built out the front 7. I also like the skill pieces that they got there committed on offense. So a really, really good recruiting class and one that's pretty balanced.
Credit to Dan Lanning, the job that he's done since he's gotten to Oregon. And Mario Cristobal did a really good job at that program before, but he has kind of taken the baton and continued to extend the lead out west, and Lincoln Riley, USC, continuing to get things going on the recruiting trail. But the job that he has done deserves a lot of credit. Kenny Dillingham as well on the offensive end. Tosh Lupoy getting it done defensively as well. So a lot to like with the Oregon Ducks. But, Drew, now we're going to go to the part where we highlight a commit that's maybe not getting as much love nationally. I know you got a guy in mind here.
Yeah, I did, and I wish I had a little more time pre-production to find the notes I had on him. But it's Bryce Bolton, an offensive lineman out of Palm Desert, California. This is a kid that went to their Saturday night live camp and basically earned him a spot in the class. And he's a little bit on the smaller side, but I've seen some of his workout videos in the past, and he was actually kind of like on my freaks list watch list. I just like the way he bend. I like his mobility, his ability, how he can get to the second level. So, Mario Cristobal did not leave that offensive line cupboard bare in any way, but I think Oregon's going to need to continue to build out the trenches, and I like what they've gotten in Bryce. You know, he's going to be a guy that's, number 18, 19, 20 in the class, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was a starter for the Oregon Ducks at some point down the line, maybe 2024, 2025. I think he's got that type of ceiling.
Drew, I'm going to give the defense some love for the first time here, and I'm going to go with safety commit Tyler Turner out of the state of Texas in San Antonio. This guy is a sub-6 foot, 185-pound guy. You watch the tape this year. He's playing pretty much predominantly at the second level as a linebacker, off-ball guy, speed and space guy, a lot of range, very good key and diagnose ability. But this is kind of what we talk about all the time, a modern NFL type of backer, and especially when you're playing in the Pac-12, you're going to see offenses from Chip Kelly and Kalen DeBoer, guys that are going to spread you out. So you need guys that can run and are versatile, hold up in the run game, in the passing game as well. We talked about that versatility in the passing game of a Kenyon Sadiq. Well, on the opposite side of the field, defensively, I think Tosh Lupoy gets a defensive playmaker, and a guy like Tyler Turner is a big pickup for Dan Lanning. So really like that a lot. Oregon continuing to get it done on the trail. So, Drew, we're going to nitpick here a little bit. If there's one part of the class that makes you say, hey, maybe there should be a little bit more attention here, or they just haven't addressed it yet, is there something that sticks out for you there?
I don't know if it really applies to the 2023 cycle, but maybe 2024 and beyond. Are they going to be able to keep adding these elite skill players, right? Oregon is still in the Pac-12. What happens when UCLA, USC, they move to the Big Ten? We see the SEC and the Big Ten just become these bigger and bigger conferences. I think Oregon needs to keep selling kids on the fact that they can get to the NFL out of Oregon. You can do it. You can make it. You can be a high draft selection. So we saw Troy Franklin. He went off. He was Bo Nix's top target against UCLA this past Saturday. I need to think that they need to keep that going in my eyes. And I think a big test for how these things go. Dante Dowdle, the running back out of Mississippi, Ole Miss, they have been circling that one, trying to get him on campus. Can they hang on there? I think Oregon probably will, but in my eyes, that would be a monster get for them, a running back. We talked about wide receiver 1, quarterback 1, chess piece number 1. Well, Dante Dowdle would be running back number 1. So you got to keep that guy in the boat, if you ask me.
Good point there. I'm going to go defense again. To me, it's more about the second level. And trust me, this was something that we were trying to solve when I was at Oregon under Mario Cristobal. But a few weeks ago, Blake Nicholson, top 247 linebacker out of Northern California, commits to Mike Norvell in Florida State. And if I had to guess, Dan Lanning, Tosh Lupoy is still working on him, especially after the last couple of weeks that Florida State has had. But I think you got to get that second level right. Noah Sewell could be out on his way to be playing on Sundays here pretty soon. Justin Flo has not shown an ability to stay healthy. I like Jeffrey Bassa a lot, but that is a position that they need to improve. I think they've done a really good job on the defensive line. I think they've done a good job on the back end. But if you are nitpicking and there's one area that they got to improve defensively, it would be at the second level. But Drew, let's finish this thing off for the Oregon Ducks. One piece left, one piece for the Oregon Ducks as they are trying to put the cherry on top of the cake here. Who is that one guy that maybe you can see Oregon adding that you could really say, okay, Oregon taking the next step in this class, in the class of 2023?
I think it's DJU's brother, Mateo Ugalele, who's there at St. John Bosco, I think if they can add a premium pass rusher to what they already have committed in that front seven, that's the icing on the cake. That's the cherry on top for me. That signals, hey, we are for real. We can go head to head with Alabama and Ohio State for a kid in California. And again, talk him into playing into the Pac-12. So I think the younger Ugalele would be a monster statement for them. And he's a guy that I think could play early on. And you see what Dan Lanning's done in the past with his defenses. I think he could eat in that system.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, I would love the addition of a guy like Mateo Uiagalelei to be in Dan Lanning's defense, in Tosh Lupoy's defense. He'd really have a chance to excel there. I think on the offensive side, I look at a guy like Samson Okunlola. I mentioned earlier in the show the number one offensive tackle in the country in last year's cycle, Josh Connerly, how big of a get that was for Oregon in the Ducks. If they can add a guy like Samson Okunlola, if you can imagine those guys bookend playing opposite of each other, that would give Oregon a formidable tackle combination for years to come. And right now, Samson Okunlola was a guy that we thought was favoring Miami. That still might be the case. Miami is struggling right now, and you wonder if a team like Oregon or someone else can take advantage of that. And listen, I got a lot of respect for Dan Lanning, the job that he does on the recruiting trail. I think he has assembled a very good recruiting staff. I think he is good for one or two surprises a year. They pulled that out of the hat last year. We saw that with Josh Connerly. I would not be surprised if he does that again. Also, Spencer Fano, top 247 offensive lineman out of Utah. They're in the mix for him as well. So I keep an eye on that. But for everything Oregon, that is our breakdown of the Oregon Ducks. Like I said, the number 10 class in the country under Dan Lanning, 22 commitments from 13 different states, the number 1 class in the Pac-12. Good time to be a Ducks fan, man, as they are looking to make a move and hopefully get into the college football playoff, which would be a heck of a statement under Dan Lanning in year 1. But Drew, time for our 2-minute drill, our favorite, and I think this one kind of raised a couple eyebrows as we're getting ready for the show. But Cedric Baxter Jr., one of the best running backs in the country, the number 2 running back in the top 247 from the state of Florida, has been committed to Steve Sarkisian in the Texas Longhorns for quite some time now. But it seems like Mike Norvell and Florida State making a move here, Drew.
Yeah, they are. And I think a lot of people forget that Cedric Baxter Jr., as a high school sophomore, was committed to Florida State. He is not afraid to say that the Seminoles are, the school he grew up cheering for. And usually the rule of thumb in recruiting is follow the visits. And Cedric Baxter was in Tallahassee on an unofficial visit 2 weeks ago when FSU fell to Clemson, right? Then during the Noles bye week, Mike Norvell lands the helicopter at Edgewater High School. And guess what? The head coach at Edgewater is a Florida State alum, Cameron Duke. He really likes the Seminoles. He bleeds garnet and gold. So we'll see what happens. I think Cedric Baxter's probably ultimately going to end up at Texas. But, what happens if there's some coaching changes in Austin? He's really close to Shard Choice, the running backs coach there. What if there's some changes at Florida State? I think this is one to certainly keep an eye on. We are kind of wondering if Baxter would take some visits. Right now we're 2 months out from that early signing period, and he's kind of poking his head and looking around. So I would definitely monitor this situation, and I would label Florida State as a dark horse in this thing to end up with Cedric Baxter in their class. And if Florida State was able to add him, man, that would really unlock a ton of different things at offense. We start thinking big picture, what they would have at some point down the line. Cooper, we were on a 2024 rankings call today. I love what they have in Luke Kromenhoek, the quarterback they have committed, the junior out of Savannah, Georgia. Picturing him in the same backfield as Cedric Baxter, I would like that. Lucas Simmons potentially at one of the tackle spots. That would be a good core group to build your offense around.
Yeah, not to mention Hakeem Williams, right? I mean, you get some of the best playmakers in the country, Cedric Baxter, Hakeem Williams. Now you just need somebody to throw him the football. So we'll keep an eye on Cedric Baxter Jr. Mine, Drew, just more rhetorical. Like, what is going on in College Station? Been a rough couple weeks for Jimbo Fisher, 3-4 on the season. They drop another one this past weekend to South Carolina. It doesn't get any easier as number 15 Ole Miss comes to town this weekend. And if you're looking at Jimbo Fisher, Drew, I just wonder, is this a guy who's capable of keeping it together and digging himself out of a hole? When when it is good, it is good. When it isn't, I don't know. I think that's a big question mark. There have been some issues in the locker room as well. We saw that earlier in the season with a couple suspensions handed down by Jimbo Fisher, with a lot of those guys being products of the 2022 historical class that Jimbo Fisher brought into College Station. 3 more suspensions this week, all freshmen across the board from a post-game locker room incident. So we don't know what transpired there, but my questions with Texas A&M, and Drew, we kind of scoffed at it a couple of weeks ago, but when Matt Rule's name hit the open market, I kind of brought up Matt Rule to College Station as a hypothetical, and I still think that is very much so, because A&M in their collective administration or resources, whatever you want to call it, is staring down the barrel of an $85 million buyout, which I think this situation for me, Drew, I'm watching it very closely and kind of seeing how A&M reacts, because I think it's going to play a very large part in college football in the way that this is going, with some of these coaches getting these guaranteed contracts. And A&M right now, if it gets into a situation, like I said, Drew, this to me just feels like Dan Mullen's last season at Florida. Things just got off the rails very quickly, and before you know it, there was a change. So that being said, I don't know where this thing is heading with Texas A&M. I can tell you this right now, between everything they got going on the field, in the locker room, with injuries, I don't feel very confident. I wonder your take on it.
Well, I'll say this because I wrote it in the winners and losers column, and then Trey Scott, our editor, I was like, "Hey, do you agree with me?" But does it feel like Texas A&M has all of a sudden turned into like college football's villain? Like so many people want to see this thing fall apart, and I go back to Saturday night. I'm trying to flip through games, and it's like I got to watch Texas A&M. I got to see what happens here. They got this awesome recruiting class. Everyone says that they paid for it, right? Jimbo Fisher's got this mega deal. I feel like so many people want to see them fail, and I think Saturday night, Ole Miss comes to town. I want to know what happens in that game. I think the Vegas line is under a field goal. You're right. It does feel kind of like that Dan Mullen. Remember Jim McElwain at Florida? Everything just kind of unravels. And if there's one program that is going to fork the money up to get out of that buyout, it's Texas A&M. There's no question about that. So Matt Rule could be the saving grace, the guy that comes in and it is the program builder and the stabilizer. It's like pouring, fuel stabilizer in the lawnmower, right? It gets everything back and running normal again. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Aggies will get a good look at Lane Kiffin this weekend too. Just keep that in mind for down the road. But guys, good to be back. Episode 29. We are moving and grooving over here. I want to give thanks to producer Jesse and Colin. They always do a tremendous job. We're looking forward to getting back on the train next week, episode 30, making a little history here with the Oyster Boys. But for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna, and for all our international viewers out there, Avita Zane. We'll see you on Monday.